Hi guys, this is not what I'm going to talk about today. I wanted to get back to the project that I was talking about in my last video about having this test harness for a 12AX7 or any kind of dual triode, but I'm aiming for the 12AX7 since it's the most common. I've got a whole box full of them, and I probably have enough spare parts around here that I can cobble all this together. So anyway, I'm going to clean off the workbench here and get things set up, and we'll start putting this thing together. All right, step number one is going to be layout. I want to lay out where all of these controls are going to go. I'm trying to come out with a layout that makes sense on this cigar box. I'm kind of having some issues getting everything split, so I want to have the first gain stage on this side of the box. I want to have the second gain stage controls over here, and there's just not a whole lot of room. So I'm going to play around with it a little bit, and I won't bore you guys with 30 minutes of fiddling around. So when I come up with something good, I'll show you guys what I got. So instead, what we're going to do here is watch all this in time lapse. Now, I did carefully lay out how I wanted the controls for the first and the second gain stage, and basically just went around with a pencil, marked where I wanted to drill the hole, then used a step drill to get the hole to the right size. Then I placed the components and screwed them in place, not worried about adding the extra wiring or other components that I need in there. This is just getting the controls in place. Yeah, and I did find that drilling from the top and then drilling from the bottom, that tended to make a much cleaner hole. So let's see, we're just about done. I'm using my old knife there to cut out a square hole for that 8 dip switch thing for the capacitor. Well, that took a while. So now I've got the first gain stage done. Gain stage 2, same kind of similar layout at least. I don't have an input in here yet. I'm not sure how I want to do this, because after I get done with this first gain stage, it would be nice to have a way to take the signal back out, maybe run it through one of those tone block circuits that I've made in the past, and then back into the second gain stage. Second gain stage is a lot more simple. All right, I'm going to glue these bad boys in. And for that, I'm going to use some E6000. It's this liquidy kind of epoxy stuff. It dries kind of to the consistency of like a hot glue gun, but maybe a little bit more flexible. So I let that dry overnight. And in the meantime here, or this is like the next day, I started to build up the components that I was going to need for the rest of the circuit. Because there's like a 68K resistor that has to go to the plate voltage on the second gain stage. So I didn't have a 68K, so I got something that was close. And then similarly for the capacitors, the bypass capacitor on that second gain stage as well, there were some unusual, unusual to me, picofarad range capacitors there, and what I just wound up doing was putting 2 and sometimes 3 capacitors together to get to the right value. And for all of those, I was within 2, 3, maybe 5 picofarad. So here it is. That's pretty much everything on there. Here's what that looks like on the underside. There'll be a whole lot more going on when I get the rest of this wiring done. Today I'm going to be looking at making a power supply for the dual triode test harness, and I have a transformer here that goes from 120 volts to 12.6 volts. So I also picked up this guy at Goodwill for $1.99. This is a 12 volt AC adapter, and it puts out about 850 milliamps, which is plenty for a 12AX7, which only requires about 300 milliamps. So the idea is I'm going to use this wall wart to power the device. I'll put an input jack probably somewhere here in the back. So the 12 volts AC will come in. It will run to pins 4 and 5 of the 12AX7. Then pins 4 and 5, that 12 volts is going to go to the secondary side of this transformer, and it should boost it back up in a oddly isolated way back up to 120 volts, and then I can run it through a rectifier, a couple of filtering capacitors, and that can do the high voltage plate voltage on the 12AX7. Alright, let's go to time lapse and watch this happen lickety split. Got to clean off those resistors there on the tags. Definitely want to drill a hole for the power input. That needs to be wired up directly to pins 4 and 5 of the 12AX7, and then it needs to go back out through the other transformer, run in reverse to get 12 volts AC back to 120 volts AC, and from there I can run it through a full wave rectifier, through a couple of filtering capacitors, and ultimately power up the tubes by connecting it to those resistors on the tag board. Alright, such as it is, there's a rudimentary power supply now. Once again, I've got a 12 volt AC wall wart that's going to come in through a jack here in the back. Set my meter here to volts AC. This is my 12 volt AC source. Now at this point, if the power supply is correct, I should have some 90 or 100 up to 120 volts AC happening here. So let's see, this first guy, this is where the voltage is coming in. It's registering 13 volts AC. All right, let's go to the next area. Let's touch that there and there. Got looks like 98, 95, and that's volts AC. Now I'm going to clip this onto ground and check some of the DC values. Let's see, that should be ground. Right, I'm on DC volts, that goes down to about 0. If we check this is the fully rectified. If I check off this first capacitor, now I have this going through a 22 ohm, like a half watt carbon resistor, and that's going into a 220 microfarad 160 volt electrolytic. That's coming out to be 3.6 millivolts. Something's not quite right. Aha! I don't have the ground hooked up from my full wave rectifier, but I do have the positive attached. Alright, I need to remedy that, then we'll come back and check. messed up the power supply about 3 or 4 times now. I have the diodes in backwards. I tried to fix that, and I had a floating ground. Alright, so now that all that's fixed, input voltage, 13 volts AC. Alright, well that's good. Once again, on the other side of this second transformer, it should be boosted back up close to 100. This is only 95. Alright, now I go over to the DC scale. Got my full wave rectifier here correctly this time. Put this guy on the ground rail over here, and I'm going to check right where it comes off of this 2 electrolytic capacitors. There's a 22 ohm and a 100 ohm half watt resistor there. Looks like 134.8 volts AC, volts DC. So that's very encouraging. Well, let's see, the plate voltage going to the second half of my 12AX7, that's 130, and this other side on pin 1, it's 127.8, and I've got all of these variable resistors and such that I can change all of that stuff. So now I'm going to dare to try putting in a 12AX7 and seeing what happens. I've got my 12AX7 in. Let's see, let's pick something kind of mundane there. Alright, filter caps are off except for I've got one there. That's the input to the first gain stage, and we'll try that first. If it doesn't catch on fire and kill me, it makes me stronger. Heater. Wow. Well, it got quiet. It's just barely on. Neat. Just changing. This is the cathode bias. Man, This is the world's first Big Muff tone control 12AX7. Yeah, it's definitely a concept that'll work. Interesting.